I appreciate it.
Yeah, I apologize. I have to go to a zoning Zoom meeting,
Yes,
so.
yeah, go for it. So our next step is to send us what you need, the questions and everything, and then Grayson and I will work. Okay.
We will get to it. I think I've got most of them down anyway.
Then we will circle back.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jackie.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Ooh, makes me want to take a shower. Oh, crap. That makes me want to take a shower. Hey,
How are you today?
How are you?
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
you doing good?
I am. How about you?
I just got out of a meeting with some sleazy.
Okay, that's what's wrong. I've got them backwards. I couldn't figure out why they didn't want to go in the right way.
I was in a meeting with sleazy people.
Sleazy people.
Sleazy people.
Oh. So John got some interesting numbers today. He's going to share with us after Todd. I know he was going to try to go to that drop-in for Stone from 4 to 5 or 3 to 4, whatever it was, and then take his iPad with him to City Hall so he could come in and talk with us.
Okay, good.
After Todd finishes, I want him to talk to somebody from his church that is on one of the water boards, maybe the Central District Water Board or something, and he's talking about how many new houses are coming online. Like, if you put everything together, John knows about, it may be as many as 2,000.
Yeah. So
do we need to? I don't know how much we need to focus on that part. I think maybe more on the protecting the minority neighborhoods and neighborhood preservation stuff.
And Elaine, when you're talking about houses, are these like single family homes? This isn't student housing or?
No, it's single family homes, and it's like the projects in Central. Yeah, it's like the projects in Central that Nieri's doing, and
right.
Of course, what's out on there's a Pendleton address out on 76. And he didn't have any information about Oconee County, but I'm sure there's some nearby on that as well. So I think I wanted to, what I was asking you about today, Todd, is understanding more about overlays and how we might could use them as we look at trying to protect our minority neighborhoods.
Okay.
Trying to protect our neighborhoods, period.
Yeah. And the other thing is how much near capacity is the Clemson Pendleton sewage treatment plant? I know we upgraded Cochran, and it's really good, but all of these on the central side and what all's feeding into that one, and how close is it coming to capacity?
To my knowledge, the central municipalities are not going there.
Okay.
It's Pendleton, Clemson, Anderson County, and it's got a lot of capacity. I know Clemson alone has got some in the neighborhood of 500,000 gallons allocated, but there's more than that available. And the discussion that will come up, especially at Packlet Milliken site, builds out, because there's 100 single family homes there, that there'll come a point where we will need more. There is capacity there, but the way it's allocated is being renegotiated right now. I know that Andy and Benji and others have been talking about that, and I'm not quite sure where the status of that is, but there's a good bit of capacity there. But as in particular Pendleton grows, which we all know there's a lot of stuff happening over there.
Mm-hmm.
And then also portions of Anderson County outside of Pendleton that are going to put pressure on that plant. Certainly for the foreseeable future, capacity is we're not outgrowing it, but they're already talking about potential expansion. One plus to that plant is the expansion out there is going to be a lot easier to Clemson because they've got land. We had to acquire land from the university,
Right.
super tight site. It's designed for expansion. So it will be a lot smoother process or faster process than what we had to go through for our Cochran Road plan. But it's a good question to ask. And I brought it up a couple years ago because with the Pacolet site, the last thing we wanted was for them to start running into problems when it takes.
Right.
And so
Right.
We need to get started because
Yeah, thank you, Catherine.
Tom has 26 minutes and I'm sure he can pick all that up. So,
Oh, and by the way, thank you, Catherine. And I
no,
was able to do my medical my conference over the phone. I finished it about 15 minutes ago, so I don't have to go. So that's
we're still going to hold you to about 20 minutes. So
okay. Great. All right. Well, in response to what y'all asked for.
wait, Todd, wait, please hang on 1 second. I need to just get everybody situated. Okay, what we wanted to do today was obviously, I'm Tiffany, I'm glad you're here. Everybody, I'm glad you're here. What we want to do, first of all, this is going to be our link for our meetings that you have. We also wanted to make sure that we're talking about zoning. There's some upcoming things that I will make you aware of that we have coming up in May with the Arthur Blank Family Foundation. Eunice, you might have talked to them. They're in Atlanta and they're going to be doing some panel discussions, 2 panel discussions for us related to their work on the west side of Atlanta. I am giving out Arthur Blank's book, Good Company. I don't necessarily advocate for the book, but I do advocate kind of for how they've approached their work in the west side. So they're going to be, I don't want to say our partners, but I hope that we will have some interesting potential collaborators for that. I'm also trying to organize a panel discussion with the group from Charleston for their for what they're doing with affordable and workforce housing. I know Eunice has been up on that. I know some of you have sent me a couple of things. I think John sent me something. If there are other panel discussions you would like to try to have, and there are other people you would like to hear from, please let me know, and we will just try to coordinate as best we can. That is the advantage of Zoom, is we don't have to have people schlep from Atlanta or from Charleston. We can do it this way. So it is a little bit easier for that. Did I forget anything else that you guys had on your agenda for this morning before I turn it over to Todd?
I don't think so, Catherine, but let's ask everybody to turn their mics off while Todd's talking. And then Todd, if you'll just kind of give us a crash course. And like I said, we really wanted a little bit more information on the overlay aspect. And then if other people have questions, you can put them in the chat box or whatever, and we'll try to get through those today. But I know John Fulmer will be joining us a little after 4:30, and we want some time with him to talk about what he has discovered about the numbers of houses coming along, and maybe set some goals for what we do want to do. Thanks, Catherine.
You're a co-host, Todd, so you can go ahead and share your screen.
Well, first, I just wanted to talk to y'all a little bit about, zoning. One of the questions Lane suggested that we give just an overview of what is zoning, and that and it's at the 30,000 foot level that zoning is the tool that a city uses to implement its plan. That a comprehensive plan or a strategic plan, or even, just a brilliant idea that comes out of a committee is not enforceable. It remains a brilliant idea until it gets adopted as an ordinance. And so the zoning ordinance, in some cases, the city ordinance for things like police issues or the rental housing ordinance, things that are not zoning, that becomes the set of laws by which a city operates. And so it is the best tool that the city has right now. It's the only tool the city has to implement their plan. Now, the zoning ordinance, it is the manifestation of the city's plans, that nothing is in the ordinance unless that's what the city wants to do. And it allows the city to determine what can happen, where it can happen, and how it happens. So the zoning ordinance really has two components. I mean, that's the purpose of it, is so we can implement a plan. And that the zoning ordinance has two components. The first is the zoning map. And then there's the zoning ordinance, which is the written text associated with it. The zoning map, I can try to share this screen here. Let me know if it's come up yet. Sometimes it takes a second. Are you seeing my screen, the zoning map?
Yeah, we can see it.
Great. So the zoning map means that the city council has taken every square foot of the city of Clemson and has designated it to be a particular zone. We have 14 zones in Clemson. A couple of them have never been used. We have language ready for them, but they just haven't been applied yet. But only council makes the decision, and only council can change what the zoning is. But every piece of land in the city of Clemson has been designated to be one of our 14 zoning designations. So once council has designated what that zoning is going to be, what land, what that parcel of land, what that zoning designation is, the next step is we turn to our ordinance. That's the written portion of this. And the ordinance for every zone, it provides a list of all possible uses that are allowed on that land. We have it's called a use table. And so you go down there, you look under the zoning that you're interested in, and you go down there and it will tell you whether or not a grocery store is permitted, whether single family homes are permitted, whether anything in the city. If it's not listed on there, if it's not permitted, then you can't do it in that zone. So it's that's one of the critical pieces, because the zoning map says what can and cannot happen on a parcel of land. And that's just the use. And then the next step, I know sometimes this can be, complex until you get more familiar with it. So don't feel don't hesitate to ask questions, because this can be complicated if you're new to this. So you got the zoning map creating the zoning designations. Then you have the use table that says, well, these are the uses that are allowed. And then you have the table of standards and dimensions. And what that does is it says how something can be built. And that includes the amount of parking required or allowed, the height, the density, occupancy levels, setbacks, landscaping buffers. If it's in an architectural overlay district, it prescribes the architecture or aspects of the architecture. But in general, that the zoning ordinance is very prescriptive. There's almost no leeway for staff to make a decision, that its council has spelled it all out for us. And so once a council has zoned a piece of property, and we then turn to the ordinance, and our job is to then implement the ordinance and make sure that whatever happens there is allowed and it's done the way the council has determined it should be done. So that's kind of an overview of zoning. Now, back in 1994, that statewide zoning was all over the place. People were doing it different, and it was causing problems. And so in 1994, the state passed what's called the Enabling Act, and it tried to standardize how cities go about applying zoning. They really didn't get into specifics. They didn't try to say how tall a building can be or what uses were appropriate. They left that up to the cities, but it focused on procedures. And so there are a set of very specific guidelines that they established for, if you're going to have zoning, then you need a planning commission, and this is how you go about changing the zoning. This is how you notify the public. This is how you engage the public. So there's a set of guidelines that are set at the state level that we all have to follow. But then within those guidelines, the city of Clemson, in our ordinance and in our bylaws, we determine further steps and processes by how we go about changing the zoning map or amending the ordinance. And that's prescribed. It all has to come through the planning commission. It goes through public hearing, and then it goes to council to make the final decision. So in a broad stroke overview, that's kind of how zoning works. And are there any questions at this point as to that aspect of it?
Yeah, Todd, I had written one in the box, but I'll go ahead and ask it now. Is it possible for two, if there's two areas of Clemson that are zoned the same zoning, can those areas have separate uses specified or separate standards, or is it pretty uniform across the zoning types?
It's uniform, Lillian, that if it's our.
Oh, I lost you somehow.
Over by the Madrid Center, any R20 in the city has the exact same guidelines.
Okay.
And so that's true for all zoning designations, that they all follow the same guidelines. So it doesn't matter where in the city you are zoned CP2, you all follow the same rules.
Thank
you. CP2. And so that's kind of the overview. It's really a very, this is what municipalities throughout the country have been using for a long time as a way to control what happens in their city. The first being, let's create zoning districts to where this is the kind of thing we want to happen here. We want this to happen here. We will allow this over here. And then come up with a map and determine on some cases, a case-by-case basis as to what a parcel of land should be zoned. And then we get into the nitty-gritty, because now that it's zoned R20, what does that exactly mean? Well, we know you can have a single family home. Well, how tall can it be? What are the setbacks? What kind of architecture? Well, actually not architecture in R20, because it's not, we don't do that in Clemson, is to involve ourselves with the architecture for single family homes. And so that's sort of the broad stroke view of how zoning works in the city. And it's a very valuable tool, because what it does is it allows citizens, when they purchase property, they know what their rights are. They know what the rights of their neighbors are. And that, and then from the city side, staff, that we're not having to, on a case-by-case basis, have to decide, well, they want to put in a veterinarian office. Is this something we want to allow here? That's already been decided.
No, let me ask a question, Todd, but you say that lightly, and it's not lightly, because if I understand how Clemson's history has worked over the past 15 years or so, working with developers has been key to making sure that the developers fit within a zoning standard specifically, regardless of whether or not it's kind of good for the city. So there's a lot of that play that zoning allows this, so you can maximize within that. And that's how we kind of all got here, which is rampant growth like that without any restrictions other than a zoning category.
Well, the zoning category and the standards associated with that. And so those decisions, you're right, Catherine, a lot of those have been in place for decades. In fact, the first zoning map of Clemson is not hugely different than the one we have today. Most of the commercial areas was zoned commercial in 1972. Most of the high density was zoned high density in 1972. And most of the low density residential has stayed the same. There are obvious exceptions to that, but overwhelmingly that has been the case. And that I didn't mean to sound like I was taking it lightly. This is very important for the city, but that the standards that are established for each zoning is done through a process of the planning commission, the public hearing, and council saying, we're going to allow mixed use buildings over here, and they can be this high and they can have this many apartments. Once that decision has been made, of which, again, staff doesn't have a vote on that, that once that has been done, that is what's called by right. And so at that point, that our job is to not to say whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. That decision has been made by council. Our job is to say, well, here's what has been determined. You must stay within these boundaries and follow these standards. And that's true whether you're adding on a bathroom to your house or building dockside, that the same principle applies, that the city has established specific guidelines and standards for every zone. And then once they're established, if you meet those standards, then you don't need additional approval because it's already been pre-approved, if you will.
So moving forward.
Sorry, Catherine.
No, go ahead.
Hearing that, my question immediately is, I'm hearing that if there has been something vetted and approved by council, so that say at dockside, only because it's top of mind, is approved so it can occur there within that zoning, that is then okay moving forward for anything else within that zoning?
Until council changes the ordinance, yes.
Okay, so because it sounded initially like it's almost an amendment to the ordinance saying, and not an amendment to the ordinance, it's not written legal language, but it sounds like, okay, well, if we're going to do it here, council has approved it for this location, which is within this zoning, then somebody who's also within that zoning who wants to do something similar can come forward and say, well, here's the precedent, and then they can also do the same thing.
That is correct. That it's what's called by right, and so the ordinance gives them the right to build certain things based on their zoning designation. And the only way that the tool the city has is to change the ordinance, to say, well, we don't think that's a good idea anymore. Let's don't allow mixed use in CP2, which is where dockside, what it was zoned. And
so it's a case of making the ordinance language more restrictive than the opposite.
Council has that right, and at any time, I mean, they have to go through the process. They can't,
right? Yeah.
Drop of a hat, but they have the right to, because they're the ones who create the ordinance, to make those changes. And then Elaine is familiar with this, that the comprehensive plan, I do not mean to imply it's not important. It's extremely important. Because it kind of, in the strategic plan, those set into motion the ideas that we want the city to implement. And the effective way of taking those ideas that are in the comprehensive plan, because one of the things in the comprehensive plan we talked about was maybe not allowing mixed use along CP2, that corridor along 123. Currently it's allowed. That was one of the recommendations in the comp plan. The critical thing is to take it from the comp plan and then turn it into code, and then bring it through the planning commission, make a recommendation, have council say, we're going to change this and we're not going to allow mixed use buildings in those areas anymore. And all that idea can generate from the planning commission, from council, from all manner of sources. But the key, Lillian, is as long as once it's in the code, it's kind of like the law and it's allowed. And that, and until the law changes, it will be allowed. And so the key is, if we see things in our ordinance that we're not happy about, The important thing is to change the ordinance, which is in part what council is doing or discussing tonight, of while we get our head around all these ideas that have been put forth in the comp plan and the strategic plan, to say, well, we're going to put the brakes on mixed use and multifamily and then figure out where we really do want them. Because right now there's a prevailing sentiment that we're not sure that we should be allowing them everywhere we do allow them now.
Todd, could you also explain about the difference between conditional use and special exception? Because those are in those standard charts too.
Correct. Thanks, Elaine. That under the use chart, you'll see three different letters. It's either P, which is permitted, and that means it's allowed. C is conditional use, and SE is special exception. Conditional use simply means that council has determined there's some additional protections or standards associated with that. Some of them can be lengthy, some of them can be pretty concise. An example is that for chickens, using chickens, that if they meet these standards, so it's an allowed use, but it has to be allowed if they meet certain setbacks and the number of chickens and the types of chickens, and Jake can speak more professionally to the chicken ordinance, but those are things that are signed off at the staff level. So those are things that council has said, we're going to allow them, but we want to put some additional layers of protection in place, and we'll let staff check off to make sure those are met. Special exception is a more stringent use. So it is an allowed use, but it has to get approval from the Board of Zoning Appeals. Examples of that might be a bed and breakfast, or a group home, or a church in a residential neighborhood. These are things that council has said we can see our way clear to allowing them, but we think it's more important than just having a checklist for staff. We want this to go through a more stringent vetting process, and with public input and the Board of Zoning Appeals, them making the determination as to whether or not the standards are met and whether or not it's appropriate for that location. And so those are the three types of uses. P, permitted, which just means it's just check the box. Conditional, there's an additional layer of approval, but it's done at the staff level. And then special exception is it has to be approved by an independent body, in this case, the Board of Zoning Appeals. Now, to complicate it just a little bit further, there, as Elaine knows, there are other uses like planned developments and patio homes or subdivisions where you're getting, somebody wants to build 6 or 8 homes on a parcel of land. That kicks in another set of guidelines that are covered in our land development regulations. And all of those have to go through the Planning Commission for them to review and to determine if the criteria that council has set have been met, and are there extenuating circumstances that need to be addressed, and then they have to grant approval. The Planning Commission is the sole voice on approval for subdivisions, but if it's a planned development, the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, and council is the only one who can make the final decision on the planned development. So you have the permitted uses, the conditional, which is all done at the staff level, special exception, subdivisions, and planned developments all involve the Planning Commission or council or the Board of Zoning Appeal.
So Todd, if we wanted to tighten things up on some zoning ordinance, then we don't necessarily have to rewrite the whole ordinance. We can just add the special exception language and then what would be accepted to allow that to happen. And that
Correct.
would be the guidelines that the BZA would follow.
Yep. It's interesting. I mean, you think about how simple some of it is. I think, Elaine, you were one of the driving, if not the driving force behind, let's establish maximum densities for our commercial zones. And we had debate, y'all came up with the numbers. We simply added a line that says maximum density, and that's all we had to do. And then that goes to public hearing, and then council votes on it. And it's done, assuming everybody agrees with the numbers. If you're starting from scratch on a special exception for something like when we did the chicken ordinance, for example, it took a lot of time. There was a lot of back and forth. A lot of the chicken lovers had their viewpoints, and the chicken haters had their viewpoints, and we did a lot of homework and work with the commission, and it took a while to come up with something that everybody agreed on. But certainly if there's, say for bed and breakfast, that you want to limit the hours or the days or something like that, if that's just one line you want to add in it, it's technically not complicated. As you know, the real challenge in these matters is that to change an ordinance, you have to have public input, which is a good thing. And that in that process between the original idea, what comes out of the planning commission, what comes out of the public hearing, and then what council wants to do with it, it is likely to morph along the way. We've certainly had ordinances that came up from a member of the planning commission, was passed through exactly as written. And then some changed a lot. It just depends on the particular ordinance and how people feel about it. But the process is not really that complicated. So one of the most important things, and Jake and Art and I were talking about it today, is that we are here to help y'all in whatever your goals are with this committee. And the best way that we can help you is to understand what some of your objectives are, what you're trying to accomplish. Because if we know that, then we can begin trying to identify where in the code we might already have support, where we might need to change things, where we might need to generate completely new code, and begin researching that and come back with you with some general ideas of well, here's a starting point. If this is what you want to accomplish, here's how we can start giving shape to your idea and put it in a format that can then become law and enforceable.
Okay, Todd, I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that. And I think that we are working on creating that vision and those ideas. Where I think I'm hoping that you and your department can understand some things, and the people on this call, is that the trust in the city to limit and to do what the residents are asking has been limited over the past 7 years at the least. It's been longer than that. So there's a lot of trust that has to be built. When you say you're going to go back and you guys are going to create something that then you're going to share with us, that gives people, even me, sort of the heebie-jeebies about what that's going to look like. Okay. So we're going to work on that, but that's what I'm saying when I say we need to do this together, so that if we're batting around an idea, and I've joked because I know this isn't going to happen, so this is why this is a joke. We're not going to create that. We're not going to ask to build zoning for a monastery in Clemson. But if we want to just bat that around for an hour, we need to be able to do that. Yeah. And even us do some of that research on what that might look like, so that all of us here want to understand zoning better. We don't want you to do that job for us. We want to understand it better. So, and I appreciate that. And your guys, everybody here knows that, and that you guys are working with us. So I just want to make sure that that's the conflict that I'm just going to put out in the open, is sort of that trust that has happened, not necessarily because of you or anybody on your team, by the way, for the record, over the past 10 years. When was the first stupid game day thing? In 2004, I believe. The first time they tried to take down Kiwi Trail. So That's where that comes from. So that's all we're asking you and your team to consider is, you don't need to give us the answer, this isn't Jeopardy. So
Gotcha.
we want to just come back and be able to think on it. But everybody else, sorry, I'm going to mute this.
So essentially what we want to do, Todd, I think what Catherine's trying to say is we want to be able to brainstorm, and then we can just like randomly put down every idea we can think of. And then we'll go back and think through what's possible, what's not possible, what's not a good idea in retrospect, and that kind of stuff. So I think that's where we are right now, kind of at that beginning stage with brainstorming.
I think it's great. I mean, we're lucky to have citizens such as yourself willing to get together and do this. Y'all are bright people. You got lots of good ideas. And that honestly, I mean, for us, we're here to help either way. You could say, we've come up with some ideas. What do you think? How can we make these happen? Or, help us troubleshoot them, or which we're happy to do. And we'll speak when spoken to, if that's the way you want to go, which is okay. Alternatively, you might say, can you do some research on this for us and, find out what others have done. We're just here. I just want to let you know, we're here to help you however you see fit. And that we're certainly not trying to dissuade y'all from brainstorming and coming up with ideas. And I want y'all to have ownership of whatever it is you do. We're just here to help at every step along the way. And that, so put us to use whenever you're ready and the way you see fit. You asked about overlay districts, and so back in that enabling act that I mentioned in 1994, that the state allowed the creation of these overlay districts and architectural review boards. And they recognized that there might be areas in a community, for whatever reason, that need some special treatment. And so what it does, it adds an additional overlay of standards. It doesn't take away the district standards. Those are the ones we were talking about earlier, which mostly are height and setback, density, things like that. Those go with the zoning. But an overlay district does that. It overlays on top of that an additional set of standards. Historically, and in our case, that in Clemson, those are architectural overlay districts, and it prescribes some very specific guidelines for the materials, the fenestration of the building, the roof lines, landscaping, entrances, a host of factors that determine. I don't want to downplay that it's simply how it looks, but it really focuses mostly on how the building looks, to a degree how it functions, because of the positioning of entrances, both vehicular and otherwise. And so the city of Clemson created, I think we have 9 overlay districts now, and that which cover most of our commercial properties, which is where and almost all of our main corridors, 76, 93, College Avenue, and 123, and even parts of 133 going up under the underpass. And what this does, it allows any community, in our case, Clemson, the ability to say, if you're going to build in those areas, you've got your district standards, which are kind of locked in, but it's important enough for us to take a look at the architecture. And to do that, you're going to have to go through a process of having this reviewed by architects and our architectural review board. And they're going to validate that you've met the standards. They have a little bit more leeway in there because of, in some cases, there are aspects of the overlay district where they don't have leeway. They can't suspend the fact that, they can grant variances. That's true for certain things, but it was intentionally designed to give a layer of protection for the city for how the architecture looks. just like the zoning ordinance, if there's a concern about the way the buildings look, the colors, the materials, the any aspect of it, those can be changed. What we would need to know is at some point, if y'all came to us and said, we'd like to create more small spaces instead of large spaces, maybe that we could explore how we could turn that into code. But the process would be the same. It would go through the planning commission and public hearing, and then council would vote on it. Usually, because we have a highly functional architectural review board right now, and we've also have a stable of architects that we commission for most projects to review. They're independent architects. We did that to make sure. We had a period where there were no architects on the architectural review board. Not uncommon when you have a small town and volunteer committee, some people burned out and a lot of people just didn't want to touch it because no matter what they did, somebody was mad at them and they were still trying to make a living. And so we came up with a plan to where we have a stable of architects and landscape architects who we can send out to review these plans. So we always have the benefit of having trained professional architects' opinions in addition to the board. Right now, we have several architects and landscape architect on the board. We got a really good board right now, but we put that in place as a protection. So the overlay districts are designed to provide this additional layer of aesthetic input and assurance that the wishes of the city are being met. And the wishes of the city are what's in the ordinance.
Todd,
Okay,
real quick, overlay requirements. I'm just going to chime in because there's a couple questions that I saw, and I think this is a good time. Do overlay requirements only relate, like you just said, to aesthetics? But I remember you also mentioned in the beginning of the discussion that they might also influence use of a space. Can you explain that a little bit more clearly, what they exactly define?
I'll let Jake speak to that. It's not really the use because that's determined in the use table related to that zoning, but Jake can give an overview of the types of things that are in the BAR purview.
Yeah,
Thanks.
right now our city only has architectural overlay districts. So they go over the building design, but also can go over landscaping requirements, functionality of even where driveway placements are, that type of thing. So it's really design oriented, both architectural and site design, and landscaping as well, and lighting.
Great.
Now,
And that's all decided, those overlay districts are designated by the city and not the state, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I was going to try to wind this section up so we can talk to John, let John talk to us about the housing inventory where he has some new information. But there are two questions in the chat box that if you could address those, Todd. The first one is, how often does the city rezone? And if so, give examples on how rezoning would occur.
Okay, the city did a complete overhaul of its zoning ordinance in 2016, I think, and might have been 15. I think it got signed in 16. And that was a soup to nuts, complete rewrite, redesign of how it was organized. I tell you what, I've been on the other side of this when I had done some building, and I found the zoning ordinance just massively confusing. It was so frustrating. So I'm very empathetic to anybody who calls and says, "Hell, I don't understand this," or "I can't find this." It's a lot better than it used to be, but it can still be complicated. So that was a major overhaul. That's when we created the CM districts. That's when we upgraded our architectural overlay standards. We created a RM 3.5, a conservation district. That was a major overhaul. Took several years to do. Since then, I bet you there have been over 100 at least updates to the zoning ordinance. There have been months where we did 3 or 4 in a month. It really depends upon what the wishes of the Planning Commission and Council are. That it's a fluid document. It can be rezoned at any time, just as long as we follow that process of Planning Commission, public hearing, and then 2 readings by council. There's nothing to stop council from changing their ordinance at any time. And it typically takes 3 or 4 months, you know, to get something through. It depends on how complicated it is and what kind of pushback there might be from certain factions, or just how everybody can agree on the final language. It can go through as fast as probably 2 months, but it usually takes more like 3 or 4 to go through. But that's just whenever y'all are ready, or anybody is ready to begin that process.
Okay, I'll just point out that the Planning Commission recommends to City Council, and then City Council votes. So it's possible to have Planning Commission vote against something and City Council approve it and vice versa. Is that correct, Todd?
That is correct. And we did I haven't done it lately, Elaine, but a few years back, there was an impression that council just wasn't paying attention to the Planning Commission, and that at that time, it was like 95% of the recommendations coming from the Planning Commission were being approved by council. There have certainly been times where they have not, and that and so it's like Elaine said, they're an advisory board appointed by council, and they make a recommendation. And that I think that lately that there seems to be a much better alignment between the Planning Commission and council. But ultimately, council has to approve. They're the ones that make the final decision. And there have been times where they either tweaked it or had a completely different direction. But overwhelmingly, they respect the work of the Planning Commission, and they take that idea. They may still tweak it, but then it goes forward.
So Bill, there's one last question in the chat box right now, and then we'll switch over to the housing inventory stuff. But Bill,
I think you might have addressed that just.
About the overlay requirements relating only to the look of the buildings. Is that what you were asking, Bill?
Well, can I press that? I think in the discussions that I've heard in this group and in other groups, part of what we're worrying about when we're thinking about having overlay is we're not just thinking about the look of the building. We're thinking of economic concerns, whether things are affordable. And so I guess what I'm wondering is that if you have an overlay district, how much can you work such concerns into the idea of the overlay? So it's not just architecture, how the thing looks and what materials they're using, but also how many units within a specific building are going to be for this income group. Okay. Can you press that?
Some of that, again, going back to something I said earlier, knowing if that was one of the objectives, there may be my response is that is probably going to reside more in the district standards than it is the overlay district standards, that there would be those would go with the district, not the architectural overlay. Still can, but it might be in the overlay district. It might be in the district standards of the zoning board itself. And of course, you know, one of the challenges that the city has, the state has, is that that to require a developer to supply X number of sub-market rate houses is what's called inclusionary zoning, and the state of South Carolina has not passed that act. We have tried we being members of the planning community have tried for several years to get something before the legislature to address, and they haven't bitten on it so far. And that what that would do would then allow municipalities, it wouldn't require them, but it would allow municipalities the right to require that. Now, there are ways to work around it. There are incentives, and which is what we've seen happen in Charleston and Greenville and other places. And that would reside in the district standards to say, for example, you can have a density of 10, or if you wanted a density of 20, then this is what you have to do. You have to give us some affordable housing. But that's then, because that's elective, it's not a requirement, but it entices them theoretically to say, well, I can come out with a win-win. I can still get a few more units that I can make money off of, and then the city benefits because then they provide some of these more affordable housing units, whether they're on site or whether they pay into a fund that allows the city to build those elsewhere. But to answer your question, Bill, I think that most of that versions of this conversation of how we can use the overlay, we wouldn't use the overlay districts. We would probably use the district standards of the underlying zoning to create these incentives or mechanisms for more affordable housing.
So Todd, if we put some inclusionary zoning ordinances into place, then that will give us a requirement to have some affordable housing in it. And if they don't want it, then they can pay, but we don't have to give them more density, do we?
Well, again, we cannot require, we cannot do inclusionary zoning because that's not legally allowed in the state of South Carolina. We would have to do it through incentives to say, these are the standards. If you want to, you've got this, you can do this by right. But if you want more density, which is usually what we're talking about, then the city is saying, we're giving you a reasonable use of your land. But if you want more than that, then these are the terms. We already have that in our zoning ordinance in the RM 3.5. There's a whole matrix of if you create park, more open space, to come up with creative stormwater, you get density bonuses. You can get more density if you give back, if you do things the city wants you to do. Currently, workforce housing and submarket rate housing, I don't think is included in that. But that would be the approach that would be the most logical based on what the way our ordinance is structured now. But the main thing I want y'all to go away with, and Bill, is that there is a way to do it. I just don't think it'll be in the architectural overlay districts. I think it'll be in the underlying district standards.
Well, great. Thank you very, very much, Todd. And everybody, let's keep the discussion. As I said to you, Todd, maybe you can come back every quarter. We can talk about, how we're making progress, and we'll work on getting you some, figuring out how to talk better about what we'd like to achieve. I think we need to take advantage of being the popular girl in class, and instead of giving things to developers, we need to take things from developers, and preferably fewer developers. But anyway, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
John, I think you are up for the 10 minutes we have remaining.
There you go. I just wanted to share some numbers, and then I actually did a little riding around yesterday, and also had some knowledge. But I've been talking about workforce housing and how I feel that possibly, while I'm not saying there's not an opportunity, but I think for the most part that ship has sailed as far as Clemson is concerned. And if Todd and Jake are on, that's fine. I hope they are. But I was talking to a gentleman yesterday who is actually apparently on the I guess it's a water commission or whatever, a water board over in Central. And he was telling me that they know that there are 1,200 homes coming in their water district, or whatever you call it. And he went on to describe some of the areas that they were coming in. 600 of those homes are going to be in the Norris Liberty area near the High Gear and Champion plant. And I think for the most part, those homes may be townhomes. Furthermore, he's aware of the fact that there's 60 acres of property there on Johnson Road across from Hidden Valley that's in the process of being, put together. And then another 40 acres on Earl Road. Both of those are being put together by the Neary Group. And then there's 200 homes are being planned for, and this is a little bit, I guess I kind of got this right, maybe where the piano factory used to be, but I think this is kind of sort of across the railroad tracks there at one of the crossings there in Central, but that's also, there's 200 homes, basically being planned in there. And then there are 50 homes on 93 there in the SWU footprint that I think SWU is starting to do. So that takes care of essentially those 1,200 homes there in Central. But then if you look at Pendleton, you got the homes behind the Waffle House. And Catherine, you and I were having a conversation when somebody corrected us, but it seemed like the fellow told us there were going to be 350 homes back there behind the Waffle House. This was at the Sunnyside that one time. And then there's also the Preserve, I think it's called the Preserve at Pendleton, which is behind the Food Line. And that's going to be between 100 and 150 homes, and they're in process of being built right now. Then you got the Falls at Meehan. And I don't know how many homes can go in there. I know that their construction has slowed down because I think of competition from elsewhere. Plus, there's a Ryan Home development across from the Pendleton Elementary School. And that's probably going to be somewhere between 50 and 75 homes in there. And then you've got the townhomes that are being built kind of down in the hold on West Queen. I'm thinking this probably with what's been built and what's being built down there is probably going to be 50 down in there. Doesn't even include the Grange, which I think is the right term for the subdivision that's going over on 123 that we see. We basically behind Patrick Square, kind of sort of back in there. And I don't really know how many homes are going in there. I mean, I've heard stories of anywhere between 250 and 300. And I think those are probably price points along that same line. And then the last is Vickery Drive. And it's my understanding that Vickery Drive price points are not what I would consider workforce housing. So anyway, and again, this doesn't even include Packlet Milligan. So I don't know. Huh?
John, why are you and Bob talking about Vickery Drive like it's a done deal?
I'm not. I'm just throwing it out there. I don't have a clue, and I don't even know. But from what I've heard about Vickery Drive is that those are going to be 350 to 400,000 homes. So that $400,000 homes. So they're not workforce housing. So all I'm saying is when we talk about affordable and workforce housing, when we talk about those two things, obviously we need affordable housing. There's no doubt about that. And I know that that's a play we're going to have to make somehow. But I mean, and I'm not saying we don't do affordable housing, but there may be other ways to do that. And I need to share these numbers with Bob too. I just found out about these in the last 24 hours. So I don't know whether Jake and or Todd are still on it. If they know things differently than that, please speak up. But that's what I have run across here recently. And Catherine, I'm not saying Vickery is a done deal. I don't know enough to say that.
I just asked because I know Bob's met with a developer and he's made reference to when Vickery Drive is done, and I'm just kind of curious. So that's my question. Anyway, no, I appreciate that, John. And I guess one of the things we need to consider is, there's a lot that plays into, and unfortunately, a lot of it's out of our control because it's not within the city limits. So
no, I think this obviously has more to do with how we look at our housing component here, and where we focus on, obviously my focus is more on affordable housing, but again, that's a whole different story. But some of the things that we've talked about, projects where you have affordable and workforce housing, and I'm not saying you don't do workforce housing, because I do think there are people that would like to live in Clemson if it's available, but the land's being gobbled up all around us. And see, this doesn't even include Oconee County. I don't have a clue what's going on in Oconee County.
It's the wild
Um,
west in Oconee County.
Yeah, so I mean, but anyway, it was, in a way, it was interesting because it creates some real issues for Central. And I guess in a way, it might create issues for the Pendleton Anderson wastewater treatment plant. I mean, I'm assuming they're aware of these numbers, but I don't know that because I'd have to believe a lot of this would feed into that particular plant.
Okay, does anybody else have anything for the good of the order, or y'all just shell shocked with all of John's numbers?
Oh, I thought, Catherine, we might add, we've got Sam Plonk here who hasn't been here before. I'm glad to see him here, and Lillian's back this time, and Bill. So we have people come, and Rosa, that's her first time as well. So we have people coming and going. But the good thing is now that we're all on the same city Zoom account, these meetings will be recorded. So you're able to go back. If you're not able to attend one and you want to catch up, you can go back and see what happened at that meeting. And I guess our next one, and we talked, Catherine, about every other week. So we will wait 2 weeks to meet again. And I think by then, hopefully you'll have some chance to look over all of this, and I may send you I have some articles that are a lot about the student housing thing, and we're really non-student housing, but looking at others. But we need to think about what the Shaw Center's doing and what their goal is. And their goal is not to build a bunch of new houses. This is to bring houses up to code, up to standard in our minority neighborhoods, and then kind of protect them from overdevelopment with other types of housing. So we'll have to figure out how we want to approach that as well. And that may be, I had thought maybe an overlay district would work with that, but it kind of sounds like it doesn't, like we need to work more with what the actual zoning is. But we just need to be thinking about that and maybe come up with a couple of things that we want to try to accomplish over the next couple of months. So I guess, Catherine, that's where we can go from now. John?
Can I add one thing? You're thinking
Sure.
about that. I was just thinking about Vista Drive, Vista Circle. There have been, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 homes built in Vista Circle here in the last 12 to 18 months. And to me, based on the price points, and there's also been one built on Abel. No, it's actually been remodeled, I think, on Abel. But I know that one on Abel sold for over $150,000. And then I know that the houses that are in the Vista, one was 130 and one was 150. And I suspect the others were probably in the 150 range. So it's almost as if on a lot by lot basis, even some of our historic Black neighborhoods are beginning to have an infiltration of workforce housing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's kind of sort of what may be happening in some cases there.
Yeah, and so one of the things that everybody had talked about at the very beginning was that we wanted to everybody wanted to be more knowledgeable about zoning. So I meant what I said to Todd and his crew is that if you have more questions, we can always invite them back, and we can invite specifically the engineer. We can talk about water and how that plays a role. With what John said, the issue of sewer and water, that was a discussion in our budget workshop, whatever day it was last week. Friday. And so we can do that. I think what we should do is think about the task that you want to take on. Thanks, Rosa. I know it's a constant learning curve. And so think about that. One of the things that we should be able to do is maybe, Elaine, this gets to your issue, is seeing how the neighborhoods we can start kind of working within and down in, figure out the right way to say it, the neighborhoods with neighborhood representatives and neighborhood leaders to talk about their priorities. You've done a lot of work with that with Next Door. Do you think we can do that?
Yeah, what I had talked about previously, and I don't know that who all didn't hear this, but the comp plan calls for creation of a council of neighborhoods, and it's with representation from the different neighborhoods throughout the city, and that's a grassroots effort, so the citizens can take that and run with it. But what I was thinking might be, I know Todd, the thing you sent me had 32 or 34 different defined neighborhoods in Clemson. And if we have a council that's that big, that might be a little unwieldy. So Bob and I had looked at the Next Door map of neighborhoods, and also with the one you had. And maybe we can draw lines around several neighborhoods to come up with a zone, or maybe zone's probably not a good word, but whatever we want to call it. And then that area would have a representative or two representatives on the council of neighborhoods. And then we could start some discussion between all of the residents with some sort of representation. So I don't know what y'all think about. That's one of the things we can tackle.
If it would be helpful, I can send you a copy of, I sent you a copy of what I had. But if y'all wanted to just pin mark, draw something up, then we can develop a more refined map like that with the right boundaries, and then you let us know how we can help from there. As I mentioned, I think, Elaine, that some of the neighborhoods are pretty active and have a HOA or a neighborhood association, and some don't. Some of the ones that I showed you on that map, we just made up because we had to group them together. So you let us know how we can help y'all, facilitate and creating that map and getting that together.
Okay, well, maybe a couple of us could sit down with you, since I'm fully vaccinated. I'm fairly comfortable being around others who are fully vaccinated. That maybe we could take several different maps and pull them together. Because if you look at the next door one, they're kind of self-defined. You get to decide where your borders are, and you submit that. And I mean, you can go in and change them if you want to. And there was a section where there were 3 houses on Berkeley Drive that were left out of any. One of them is where Greg Rice lives, and they were left out of any of the defined neighborhoods on next door. So I think we could take a look at that, and just, Bob and I did draw some circles around and thought we could narrow it down to 10 or 12 areas, and then have that's maybe a better word than zones, areas, and then have a couple of representatives from each one. And anyhow, I'd be willing to take the different maps that we have and sit down and kind of look at them with a couple of people and see if we can figure out what might be the best place to divide our town up into these neighborhood areas. Not really a neighborhood that has an HOA or anything like that, but starting to get them organized at some local level. So if anybody's interested in working on that, just shoot me an email or text or something, and hopefully within, it'll probably be the latter part of April, but I'd like to get together and start looking at that. Catherine, you're muted.
I apologize. I was ordering dinner before our city
Oh.
council. It's for delivery. No, I think that sounds great. Does anybody else have anything for the good of the order? Thank you all very much. I'm looking, wait, there's Lillian. Is it possible? Oh, that's the old question. Okay, sorry, Lillian. Okay, guys, if you think of anything, you can reach out to, Elaine or me or any of us. But otherwise, we will look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks, couple weeks.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd.
You're welcome.